Hello friend, welcome back to my channel. How are you today? I hope you're doing well. It's Tim here, and in this video, I'm going to guide you through the steps to create this Impressionist inspired landscape painting. This painting is another in my Impressionist series working with the palette knife brush, which is my absolute favorite brush to use, so I'm super excited for this one. This will be a slightly longer tutorial than some of my other ones as well. This painting is based off of another painting I did a while ago that I got a request for if I could do a tutorial. At first, I actually wasn't even sure how I would turn this painting into a tutorial with so many colors going on, so that definitely made for a fun challenge. And I realized really quickly there was no way to keep it under an hour, so I tried to keep it under 2 and I made it just barely. So this is kind of an extended director's cut of this tutorial. And before we begin, I really wanted to say about paintings in this palette knife style. In these tutorials, while I will be going through each section step by step, I really want to help you by focusing more on the techniques like how to mix and build up colors and how to focus on lighting and shadows, and how to really create the effect of the palette knife in a digital medium. Your painting probably will come out a little differently than mine, even using the same colors and technique, and that's perfectly okay. It's just part of the magic of the style, so I hope you have fun on this painting adventure. So if you recreate this painting and are on Instagram, I would absolutely love to see it, so please tag me at Timstar Studio. Upcoming here are the hex codes for the palette of colors that you'll need to be able to paint along with me. Here are the main brushes that I've used. It's a very simple list today. All of the brushes are in the default library except for my palette knife brush, which I do have a video up on my channel on how to recreate this brush from scratch, so if you need it, definitely go check it out. The first step of this tutorial will be to take a screenshot of this trace outline layer and paste it into a square size canvas on Procreate. Then you're going to turn the opacity of it down and fit it to the screen size. And then in a new blank layer, you're going to trace over it so that way you have a trace outline layer to work with to follow along with for your painting. Please feel free to take any breaks that you need along the way, and when you're ready, let's begin. So here in part 1, we're going to begin by laying down our background colors and creating a light source for our painting. Alright, so let's turn down our trace layer. Let's turn it down to around 10% or so. Let's add a new layer, and we're going to put that layer underneath of the trace outline layer. Let's open our colors here, and we're going to fill our entire canvas. Let's use the 6th color in the 4th row, this shade of gold, and let's fill in the entire canvas. Let's add a new layer. Now using the paintbrush with the soft airbrush, let's use about 14% or so brush size with full opacity. Let's use the 4th color in the 1st row, the shade of yellow, and right here, right around where the top of the middle of the trees are, where our path leads to, right where the circle is, let's scribble some yellow, just like that, kind of creating an oval shape there right around the center. Let's use Gaussian blur and blur this layer to around 44%. Now let's turn this layer down. Let's turn it down to around 46% or so. Then let's add a new layer. Now we're going to use the 3rd color in the 1st row, this pale shade of yellow. And we're going to squiggle a much smaller amount of this yellow right here in the center, kind of in a circular oval shape again, just like this. Now using Gaussian blur, let's blur this layer to around 38%. Now let's turn this layer down. Let's turn it down to around 79–80% or so. Then let's add another new layer, and we're going to repeat this, creating an even smaller circular oval shape of squiggles right there and right around the center of that circle. Now let's use Gaussian blur and blur this layer to around 35%. Then we're going to turn this layer's opacity down again to around 63%. So now that we have our light source created, In this upcoming section, we're going to be focusing on creating the base colors for our background. Still using the soft airbrush, we'll be painting a lot of squiggles and a lot of dots. That'll create a lot of really fun and creative color blends along the way and midtones to work with. And then using Gaussian blur, we will blur them out, and we'll keep building and repeating this process layer by layer for our background. Now let's collapse all of our layers together. Now let's add a new layer. And using the first color in the 6th row, this shade of brown, starting at the bottom left-hand corner, about a third of the way into the painting, about right here, we're going to paint some squiggles running across the canvas, just like this. Don't worry about making anything too perfect there. Let's paint another set of squiggles in between those 3 trees, just right around here. Let's paint some over here, next to the tree on the left-hand side edge. And then starting in the upper right-hand corner right here, let's paint some squiggles horizontally, working our way down. And as we work down, we're going to work a little bit thinner, just connecting those 2 areas. Now let's use Gaussian blur and blur this layer to around 35%. Let's add a new layer. Let's up our brush size to around 47%. Now using the 6th color in the 3rd row, let's paint a line, working our way from the upper left-hand corner downwards, and we're going to stop right around here, right before the bottom of the tree. Just like that. Now starting on the upper left-hand side, up here at the top, we're going to paint another line going across the top, and we're going to stop right before we get to the edge, right about here. Now let's shrink our brush size again. Shrink it down to around 25%. Now using the 5th color in the 3rd row, the slightly lighter shade of blue, starting in that upper left-hand corner again, about right here, we're going to start scribbling some blue squiggles, working our way horizontally down, ending about right there. Then we're going to squiggle some more, going to the right, and we're going to stop right before the edge again, just like that. Now let's use the 4th color in the 3rd row. Now along the upper edge again, right here in the center, we're going to paint a small squiggle of color right around there, just like that. Now let's grab the 3rd color in the 3rd row, and starting in the upper right-hand corner, right where that edge drops off at right here, we're going to squiggle that over to the edge, just like that. And then very loosely working our way down, we're going to squiggle just a little bit more color, working our way down along that right side edge, ending about right there. Now right under the tree outline right there, we're going to place a couple of dots, just sporadically and randomly across that area. Let's put a couple over here. Now grabbing the 4th color in the 3rd row again, let's grab a couple of blue dots right here on the right-hand side edge, just randomly. I'm going to grab a couple of those right there. Now let's use the 4th color in the 4th row. Now along the upper edge again, right here in the center, we're going to paint a couple of these turquoise dots just randomly here. Let's paint a couple of these turquoise dots over here on the left side edge, just randomly. And then let's put a couple right here on the right side edge. Now using the 2nd color in the 3rd row, along the left side edge here, let's add a couple of dots here around the bottom. And then let's add a couple of dots here on the right side edge, just like that. Let's put a couple here on the right corner. Now using the 5th color in the 2nd row, now on the left side edge between those 3 trees again, let's add a couple of these brighter pink dots. Let's add some here in the corner, and then a couple down here on the right side edge. And then let's grab the 6th color in the 2nd row. And then we're going to paint dots along the left side edge randomly, along the top edge, and then down the right edge. Now using the 1st color in the 5th row, starting right around these 3 trees again on the left side edge right around here, we're going to add a couple of random brown dots. Let's add a couple here on the right-hand side edge, just randomly. And let's add a couple here on this left side edge right around where the tree is. And I know this painting looks kind of crazy right now, but trust the process. Now let's grab the third color in the fourth row, this bright shade of green. On the top edge, middle area again, we're going to dab a couple of these bright green dots. Let's put a couple over here in the left corner. And then let's put a couple down here. Now using Gaussian blur, let's blur this layer to around 40% or so, which completely changes the look of it. Now let's turn this layer's opacity down. Let's go to around 91% or so. I don't want to completely get rid of it. Now let's add a new layer. Let's use the fourth color in the second row, and let's shrink our brush size. Let's shrink it down to around 17%, still full opacity. And along the right side edge, around in the middle, I'm going to dab a couple of pink dots, just here and there. Let's put a couple up here in the right-hand corner. Let's put a couple down here, middle left side edge. And let's put a couple in here. Now let's use the sixth color in the first row. And along the upper edge again on the left-hand side, not completely in the corner, let's put a couple of dots right around there. Now on the right-hand side, middle area again, we're going to dab a couple of these red dots, just like that. Let's put a couple over here, right around the tree area. Now using the fourth color in the first row again, right above the circle area, I'm going to dab a couple of yellow dots right around here. Now in the upper left-hand edge, let's dab a couple up here. Let's put a couple right next to the tree edge, right around there. I'm going to put a couple along that right-hand side edge again too, just randomly. Actually, let's put a couple down here below the circle. Now let's use the fourth color in the fourth row, and using the shade of teal along the left side edge, let's paint a couple of dots right there. Let's put a couple up here along the top edge. I'm going to put a couple over here along that right side edge. And this is only going to work too because we are doing so many layers. Generally, if you end up mixing this many colors together all on the same layer, you end up with mud, which is why I'm using so many layers. It's always a little excessive, but it gets the job done. We're a little extra here on this channel, if you can't already tell. Let's take the fifth color in the first row. And I'm going to paint these orange dots all over the upper area, just in random places, not too heavy. I'm just putting a couple of dots just here and there along the entire upper area. Just like that. Now let's use Gaussian blur, and let's blur this layer. Let's blur it to around 21% or so, which has already kind of given us the effect that we want. Now that we have our first layer of dots down and blurred out, it kind of gives a better idea of the process that I'm using. There's a method to the madness, so we're going to repeat this process again in another layer of dots. Now let's add a final layer of dots, so let's add another new layer. Now using the sixth color in the second row, this ultra shade of violet, along the middle left side edge right around here, let's paint a couple of purple dots. And in the same place on the left side edge, let's put some over here. Now let's grab the fourth color in the fourth row again, and I'm going to dab a couple of teal dots right here, right under the tree area, along that curve right there. I'm going to put a couple of teal dots over here. Let's put a couple right in the crook of that tree. Now using the third color in the fourth row, that bright shade of green, I'm going to put a couple of dots right around the center of the upper edge, right along there. Let's put a couple over here on the left corner. Now let's use the second color in the second row. Now in the upper right-hand corner, let's place a couple of these red dots. Let's put a couple down here along that middle area, still on the right-hand side. And let's place a couple right in here under the tree. Now let's use the fourth color in the second row, that shade of pink again. And let's place a couple of dots right there. Let's place a couple along that right side edge again. Let's place a couple right around the tree. Let's place a couple in that middle left side edge. Maybe a couple right there in the crook of that tree again. And then let's grab the fifth color in the first row, that shade of orange. And I'm going to put a couple of dots of orange right there where I put that pink. Let's go down here along this area and let's put a couple of orange dots right in there. Let's work them this way over to the right. Let's put a couple over here. Let's put a couple on the upper right hand corner. And then a couple along that tree. Let's put a couple over there too. And one right there. That looks good. Now let's use Gaussian blur. And blur that layer to around 18%, which completes the upper part of our painting. Now let's collapse all of these layers together. Just be careful not to merge the trace layer onto all the layers you merge down. Make sure it stays on top separately. Now let's paint the path and the ground colors. Now let's add a new layer. And using the sixth color in the third row, this dark shade of blue, along the left side edge of the path right here, let's paint a thin strip of color. Now let's use the second color in the third row, this shade of purple, and let's paint another strip of color right next to it. Let's use the fifth color in the second row and paint another strip of color right next to that. Now using the third color in the second row, let's paint a strip of red right next to that, and we're starting to approach the middle here. Now let's grab the fifth color in the first row, this shade of orange, and paint a strip of color next to it, and should be right around the center of the pathway. Now using the fourth color in the first row, let's paint a strip of yellow right next to it, kind of crossing over it just a little bit. Now let's use the first color in the sixth row, this dark shade of brown. And now along that right side edge of the path, we're going to fill that edge of brown here, just like that, leaving a strip of that original goldish orange color in the middle there, so we don't have to use that color at all. Now let's use Gaussian blur and blur this layer to around 23%, and then we're going to turn this layer's opacity down quite a bit. Let's turn it down to around 68%. Now let's add a new layer. Still using the soft airbrush. Now let's use the fifth color in the fourth row, this dark shade of green. Now starting at the bottom left-hand corner, around right below a third of the painting inwards, right around here, which will kind of cross right over the bench area, we're going to paint a line connecting over top of the edge of the pathway, just like this. And then let's squiggle some color just to fill in that little strip of color here, just like that. And now let's repeat that same on that other side, finishing that off on the right-hand edge. Now let's grab the first color in the fourth row. Now at the very edge of the pathway right here, let's paint a strip of color connecting the background to that darker green. And I'm going to make my brush size just a little bit smaller. Now starting on the left-hand side edge, we're going to squiggle some of this color, moving and connecting right there in the center of the painting. And then we're going to repeat that same for the right-hand side. Not being too careful about where the colors overlap yet. Now let's use the fifth color in the third row, that shade of blue. And at the base of the big tree right here, we're going to squiggle some of this blue just in a random pattern underneath. Now let's use Gaussian blur, and let's blur this layer to around 25%. Now using hue and saturation, let's turn this down a little bit, and let's turn the saturation down too. Let's turn it to around 40%, which will give us a nice base to work with. Now let's add a new layer, and using the first color in the fourth row again, and starting on the bottom left-hand corner where the grass is, let's scribble a little bit more of this color, connecting the top, basically repeating the same, and then working that way to the right hand side again, finishing off at that edge. Now let's use Gaussian blur and blur this layer to around 16%. Let's merge all of these layers back together. Now let's add a new layer, and let's put this layer into soft light. Now we're going to add some shadows and some light. Still using the soft airbrush with the paintbrush. Now let's up our brush size to around 79% with full opacity, using the second color in the first row, the shade of black, and we're going to paint a thin line along the left side edge, working our way all the way to the bottom, just like this. Then we're going to paint it across the top here, just like that. And then painting it down the right-hand side edge, finishing off at the bottom. Then we're going to round off the corners on both sides. Now let's shrink our brush size down. Let's shrink it to around 20% or so, still with full opacity. And we're going to add a little bit of shadow here to our pathway. Now starting on the left side edge of the pathway right here, let's outline the edge here, kind of just fading our way up to the top, kind of stopping right before the very center. And then we're going to repeat that same on the right-hand side edge, stopping right before the very end. Then starting on the left side edge again, we're going to make some squiggles, moving across our pathway, ending right before the end again, just like that. Now starting on the bottom left side corner, let's add a squiggle across the grass area, just like this, ending right before the middle part. And then let's repeat the same on the right-hand side, stopping about right there. Now let's add a squiggle of shadow, starting on the top upper left-hand corner, working our way down, ending about right there, right where the squiggles connect, and then repeating the same on the right-hand side. Now let's repeat the same across the top. And we're going to put just a little right below where the big tree area is, just like that. Now let's use Gaussian blur, and then we're going to blur that layer to around 20%. And now we're going to turn this layer's opacity down quite a bit. Let's turn it down to around 16%. Now let's add a new layer and put that layer into overlay. Now using the first color in the first row, let's squiggle some of this white color across the middle area, right around here, right over top of where the circle is, ending right in the middle of the path, right about there. Now let's add some random highlight dots here, starting on the left-hand corner. Just adding that sporadically along the left side edge, just in a random pattern, working our way across the grass. Now let's do it along the top. And then repeat that same along the right side edge, working our way down, working our way across the grass, but not onto the pathway. And then we're going to fill in this area here, just sporadically. Now let's use Gaussian blur and blur that layer to around 22%. Now let's turn this layer down. Let's turn it down to around 53%. Now I'm going to turn our trace layer off. Let's make a copy canvas and paste it over the top. Now to begin part 2, and we're going to start blending out our painting. And in this section, we're going to be using the palette knife brush, and we're going to be using a series of 2 different paint strokes, both of which are going upwards and slightly to the right, but one is more up and one is more sideways, just like this. And we're going to be using this repeating pattern to blend out our painting. I do find it more helpful too to blend in rows, so we're going to be blending from top to bottom for this part mostly as well. Now let's switch over to the blending tool now, and we're going to use the palette knife brush. Let's go to like 20% brush size. And working in rows across our painting in small sections, let's start blending this out. And it will definitely help to break the blending into sections to blend it out with. So I'm starting here at the top right-hand corner in a small section, and using our 2 repeating paint strokes, I'm going to blend along the top edge in rows. And then as soon as I reach the end of the first row, I'm moving back to the left and then repeating the process of moving down just a little bit, working my way to the right-hand side again, and then I'm just repeating this going down, painting until I reach the top edge of the grass. And then right before we get to the grass here, we're going to stop just at the edge of the pathway, just like that. And we're going to repeat the same, moving our way across the painting. And then repeating the same for the left-hand side corner, just connecting all of our newly blended colors. Stopping right before we get to the grass. So once you're finished blending the top sky area, now it's time to blend out the grass. Now for the grass, we're actually going to use the same paint strokes, but we're not going to blend out into the actual pathway, so blend right up until it. So we're going to work our way, oops, then working our way down here. Just kind of helps us easier see that area a little bit. Just like that, and then we're going to repeat the same for the right-hand side, not blending onto the actual pathway yet. When you reach the bottom here, we're going to start blending the pathway. Now the easiest way I've found to do this, let's blend straight across here. And to blend out the path, I'm going to be using straight across, back and forth singular paint strokes, just like this. So starting up here at the very top of the pathway, we're just going back and forth, blending just like this, until we reach the bottom. Which actually kind of creates a really cool trippy effect. Kind of a wigwag effect there. And when we reach the bottom here, we're going to start adding some more color to our painting. So let's add a new layer. We're going to switch over to the paintbrush now with the palette knife brush. And let's switch over to around 5% brush size, still with full opacity. Now let's add more color to our painting. Now in this section, we're going to be using my confetti method of painting, which is just a fun name you guys have given this style of painting, which is basically just randomly and chaotically adding color to our painting, kind of like what we did with the soft airbrush from earlier, just with a little bit more spice. Let's use the 5th color in the first row, and using short, random paint strokes that go any direction. And I do find just lightly tapping the screen seems to work best. We're going to start painting our confetti dots. Starting right around here, right underneath the tree, we're going to paint some orange dots, just random in random places. Right underneath the tree there, just like this. Now let's add some to the right side edge, middle area, just kind of connecting the two areas. Let's add a couple down here and along the bottom side edge. I'm going to put a couple here in the middle of the tree branches. Let's put a couple over here. And let's add a couple right around there. Now using the 4th color in the first row, let's zoom up here. Right around the middle, top edge area, right around here, let's add a couple of yellow dots. Zoom back, let's add a couple right underneath of that tree branch area, kind of connecting that yellow from the middle into the outer edge area. Let's put a couple down here, right around that middle bottom area, right before the path. Let's add a couple over here, just kind of blending those two areas. And let's put a couple into that right-hand area as well. I'm going to zoom back. Let's put a couple up here. Let's put a couple down here too, right at the edge of the grass. And let's shrink our brush size to around 3%. And let's squiggle some color right down the center there. And let's up our brush size now back to around 5%. Now using the fourth color in the third row, the shade of blue, starting right around here in the middle of the topper edge area, let's put a couple of blue dots. Let's put a couple over here in that top left side edge. I'm going to put a couple on that middle area right around in there. Let's put a couple right around in here. Just kind of finishing up that right hand corner. Let's add a new layer. Let's grab the fourth color in the fourth row. Let's put a couple of teal dots right around in there. Let's put a couple right in there. And let's put a couple in there as well. We're going to put a couple along where the tree area is, just like this. Let's put a couple down here, right around the base of that tree too. Now let's grab the second color in the second row, this dark shade of red. Let's put a couple right around here. Let's put a couple right along that edge area. Let's put a couple right along that top edge area, right on the right hand side, and then kind of following that up randomly, sporadically across that right hand corner and along that right hand edge. Sorry, there's so many different places I'm putting dots, I'm getting kind of tongue-tied. Let's put some along the left hand corner edge, put a couple up there, a couple right there in the middle of the tree. Let's put a couple right there too. Now let's grab the second color in the fourth row and we're going to add some highlight color to the grass. So starting on the left side edge, we're going to put a couple of dots along that left bottom corner. And let's work that color, making dots all the way up until the center, just like this. And then working our way back down on the right hand side. Let's put a couple of these green dots. Let's put it here in the middle, just like that. Let's put a couple right around that green upper area, just like that. And then let's put a couple up here in that left corner. And a couple working our way back down. And then into that tree corner there. And now I know our painting looks crazy, but definitely trust the process. You'll see where we're going here in just a second. So let's grab the third color in the first row. Let's put a couple of these light dots right around that circle area, kind of in a circular pattern, working our way outwards just a little bit, just like this. This will definitely create a nice focal point of brightness for your painting right here in the center. Now let's grab the fourth color in the second row, and I'm going to add just a couple of straight pink lines across the left side of the pathway, right along there. Now using the sixth color in the third row. Now along this left side edge, we're going to put a couple of these blue dots, just following up just along that edge. Now let's grab the first color in the third row, that shade of ultraviolet, and kind of put it in between the pink, just like that. Now on this side, let's grab the third color in the second row, that dark shade of orangish red. And now following up on the other side, let's place some dots following the lineup up to the top edge here, just like that. I'm going to add a couple of dots down here. Now let's grab the first color in the 5th row, that brown, and then drag a little bit of that color over, just like that. A little bit more sparingly, though, on that color. Now let's combine both of our color layers, but be careful not to merge it into the trace outline. And let's turn the opacity of this layer down. Let's turn it down to around 53%. Now let's add a new layer. Let's put that layer into overlay. And now we're going to add some more highlight and shadow dots. Let's grab the first color in the 1st row, the shade of white. And now starting in the center where the circle is, let's use the paintbrush with the palette knife brush again. Let's add some more confetti dots, kind of in a circular pattern, in a spiral, working our way outwards, just like this. Keeping the most concentrated color right around the center. But this is adding all kinds of variation to the color we just laid down as well. You'll see when we go to blend here how big a difference that makes. Just working our way outwards to the edge. And we are keeping it off the pathway. I'm just putting the dots in the grass and the background. And then I'm going to add just a couple of dots right around in there, kind of making sure that the heaviest cluster of lightness stays right around the center, just like this. Let's turn this layer down. Let's turn the opacity of this layer down to around 71%. Let's add a new layer and put that layer into soft light. Now using the second color in the 1st row, the shade of black, starting along the left side edge, let's start adding some black confetti dots, which will add so much depth, and we're just working our way downwards along that left side edge. And we're going to work our way across here along the top, keeping them mostly heavily concentrated around the edges. Once we get to the bottom side here, we're going to work our way closer to the middle and kind of start another U shape. And as we work our way around to the other side, just like we did before, we don't want to make these dots too clustered. Working our way into the center here. Just like that. I'm going to add just a dark line along the pathway edge here, just like this. And then along the right-hand side edge, just like that. Doesn't need to be too perfect. Now let's turn this layer down. Let's turn it down to like 43%. Now I'm going to turn the trace outline layer off. Let's do a copy canvas and paste. And once you get that pasted over the top, it's time to blend out our painting again. Now using our palette knife brush again, let's go down to around 10% brush size, still with full opacity. And we're still using the same process, using 2 short repeating paint strokes, both going to the right, but one is going slightly more upwards to the right and one is slightly going more sideways to the right. And I do find it helpful to break up the painting into sections to blend it out with, that way it's not as overwhelming. So I just pick a side that you want to start on, and when you finish, move on to the next section. And we're going to repeat these same steps going into the grass now, but we're not going to bring this into the pathway quite yet. So just go right up to the edge here. And we're going to repeat that across the middle of the painting. And I'm just blending over right where the tree is going to go, just combining it. And I didn't put too much color there just because that area is going to get covered up, so it's really not too big a deal. We just want to make sure and treat it just kind of like the rest, even though there's not as much color there. And then repeating the same on the left side edge, finishing this area up with the blending. So much of our color ends up getting blended away and melted together, which is why I don't mind too much of complementary colors and generally colors that would create mud being close together, because it ends up just creating some nice blends in between those colors. Working our way down here. Repeating these same steps onto the grass area, blending that out, but not onto the pathway yet. Once you get your background blended out, we're going to go ahead and blend out the pathway. Once we get to our pathway, we're actually going to use our back and forth sweeping paint strokes, starting up here at the top, just going back and forth, working our way down. Occasionally, I am lifting the brush up a little bit too, just to kind of help reset the brush. Working our way downwards here. And then along the left side edge, I'm going to go back and forth to reinforce that edge. And then starting up here at the top, using those same paint strokes, we're going to work our way down. Starting to blend out our purple, pink, and blue areas into the red, orange, and yellow. Just like that. And then finishing off, kind of roughing our edge up just a little bit right along there. We're going to repeat the same across the right side edge. And you can either start at the bottom or the top. Doesn't matter too much. Let's reinforce that just a little bit. And then we're finished going along that edge. And once I get this area blended out, I'm going to go back in and, using the same paint strokes as before, do a little bit of cleanup work. I'm going to blend and smooth out our path just here and there a little bit more, just to kind of blend out all of our colors together a little bit nicer, to create a nicer transition and smooth any harsh edges that might have been left behind from the brush. And to create a little bit more smoothness, I'm using singular back and forth paint strokes, lifting the brush at the end of each one, which will smooth out any unwanted texture out really nicely. Now let's add a new layer. We're going to put that layer into soft light. And using the second color in the first row, let's grab the soft airbrush with the paintbrush. Let's do like 78-80% or so brush size with full opacity. Starting on the left side edge again, we're going to paint a straight line down just like that. Then along the top, and then along the right side edge. And actually, let's bring a little bit of the shadow on the left side edge here, right around, creating kind of a triangle shape, just like that. Now let's use Gaussian blur and blur that layer to around 41%. Now let's turn the opacity of this layer way down. Let's turn it down to around 25% or so. So before we start painting the trees, I wanted to add another layer of highlights to our background. And I wanted to say a quick thank you to you for supporting my channel, friend. I hope you're enjoying the tutorial so far. If you like this video, I invite you to like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps my channel out, and I really appreciate the support. Definitely let me know below too what your favorite part of this painting has been so far. Let's add a new layer and put it into overlay. Now let's switch back over to the palette knife brush with the paintbrush. Let's do like 5% brush size with full opacity. Let's go ahead and use the first color in the first row, the color white. Starting here in the center, we're just going to add a couple of white dots right around the middle of that light spot. And actually, let's turn our trace layer on just so it's easier to see again. Let's put a couple of white dots, working our way outwards up into the middle upper edge, kind of just dispersing our way out. They don't need to be super clustered. Let's put a couple along the right side edge. Let's put a couple going down here, connecting the middle to our pathway. Let's put a couple over here, working our way down just randomly and sporadically. And then let's put a couple over here. Kind of crossing over into where the tree area is. Now let's add another new layer and put that layer into overlay. Again, still using the same color, starting right at the tip of the pathway, right at the top here. We're going to squiggle some lighter color coming down just like this. Now let's use Gaussian blur on this layer and blur this layer to around 25%. Now let's turn this layer's opacity down quite a bit. Let's turn it down to around 55%. Let's turn the trace layer off again. Now let's create another copy canvas layer and paste. Let's switch back over to the blending tool now with the palette knife brush, and let's blend out all of our new highlights. And we're only blending out our new highlights. We're not reblending the entire painting. This will create some really beautiful color blends. Blending as little or as much as you'd like on the new highlighted areas. Some I like to leave a little bit more bold. Some of them I like to kind of blend away to create mid-tones here and there. It's really up to you. Create a really different look depending on how much you blend it out. Then repeating that, going across the middle. And I am blending across that area again too where the tree is going to sit, just to make sure that the color is still like implied that it's behind the tree. I just didn't see a purpose in painting all of that area behind it just to cover it up. And then finishing off with this right hand side, working our way down and across. And once you're happy with your blending, we're going to create a copy of this layer that we're working on, so that way there are going to be two of them now. And I create an extra copy here, that way in case you mess up or don't like what you've done, we have an extra just in case as a backup. And now it's time to paint the trees. Let's turn our trace outline layer on. Let's add a new layer. And first we're going to use, let's switch over to the paintbrush now with the water pen. Let's go to like 6% brush size with full opacity. Let's grab the first color in the 5th row. And starting here in the middle, we're going to start filling our trees in. So let's start above there and paint a straight line down, ending about right there. Let's paint the tree branch right there. And paint the tree next to it. Then the one next to that one. Let's work our way over here to the right, filling that in, and then painting the tree branch. Let's paint the next one. And then starting to fill in that one here on the right side. And then right here, I forgot to fill this one in. So let's fill that in there, right like that. Now, we're going to take hue and saturation and up the saturation a little bit, around 73%, and let's up the brightness just a little bit. Let's go to like 52%. Let's turn the trace layer off for just a moment, so that way we can see it a little bit easier. I'm going to add another new layer using that same color. Starting on that left side tree again, we're going to add just a little bit more color to it, filling it out just a little bit more. And then to the tree next to it. Actually, let's bring that on to that tree branch. We're going to fill that edge out, making the bottom of these two trees just a little bit wider. Let's move over here to the right. And now on this big tree on the right, let's add just a little bit more color to that, filling that out. And then on to the one right next to that. Now let's turn our trace layer back on. Let's up our brush size to around 10%. Let's fill in this right-hand tree, ending right about there. Then let's switch back over to the left side and fill this tree in, this tree in. Now using the hue and saturation tool, we're going to actually turn the brightness of this layer down just a little bit to around 48%. And then let's add another new layer. Now we're going to fill in the biggest tree. And we're going to use the same color we used for the rest of the trees to fill in this tree outline. And don't worry about making it too perfect right now. We're going to go back in and blend it out here in just a little bit. Let's turn our trace outline layer off. And now I'm going to actually turn this saturation of this layer down quite a bit. Let's turn it down to around 45%. And let's turn saturation down to around 43% as well. And now it's time to blend out our trees. In this section, we'll be using the blending brush with the water pen to help blend our trees into the background. And I'm using a really light hand to do this with, and very sparingly, so I don't disrupt the shape of the tree, but just to kind of help add to it and add some texture to it. And I'm kind of gliding over top of it using long sweeping paint strokes to grab some of the background color in with the tree color to help it blend better with the tones in the background. Let's make a copy canvas and then paste it over the top. Now let's switch over to the blending tool now with the water pen as well. Let's do around 5% brush size with full opacity. And starting with this tree in the middle here, working slightly above it, dragging our way up and then dragging back down along the edge here. And then back up to clean that up. Just helping to blend our tree into the background. And then let's move on to the next one. And when you're blending, you'll probably end up crossing over the trees you've already painted, but that'll get fixed when you blend over the next tree. And we're just going to keep repeating this process for the next couple of trees. Just be careful too when you're blending not to grab too much of the background color into the tree blend. You still want to preserve just a little bit of that brown color. Like here, don't worry, you will cross over top of the main big tree in the front, but we'll fix that here in a moment, so don't worry about that. towards the bottom here too, because this one's getting just a little bit bigger and I still want the base of the tree just to be a little bit thicker. I'm going to blend this one out just a little bit more down here. And then I'm going to repeat this on the far left brown tree, not touching the big tree yet. And when you get this left side of trees completed, we're going to repeat the same process on the right side. Now here, I'm going to up my brush size just a little bit. Let's go to like 7% or so just to make it a little bit easier on these bigger trees here in the front. And I think I want to blend the bottoms of these trees here on the right side just a little bit more than on the left side. So I'm going to use short back and forth paint strokes to kind of blend the bottom of these trees into the green grass area just a little bit more, just like this. Now let's blend the big tree. Now for this big tree, I'm going to come back forward. Let's change our brush size to around 10%. And let's start cleaning up that edge just a little bit. Working our way downwards, just making sure the bottom part of the tree is in fact wider than the top part of it is. Let's clean up that left side edge. Now the branch. And then working our way back down the other side here. We're going to connect the bottom here, just like that. Just kind of going back and forth, creating like a middle brownish green color between the bottom and the tree. Just like that. Now we're going to add some highlight and some texture to our tree. Let's add a new layer and put that layer into soft light. Let's grab the first color in the first row, the color white. Now using the paintbrush now with the palette knife brush again, let's do like 5% brush size with full opacity. And on the right side of the big tree, right here, we're going to paint a little bit of color. Let's put some on the underside of the branch. Just working our way up to the top. And then let's continue this color down just a little bit, right along that right side edge of that big tree. Now let's turn the opacity of this layer down. Let's turn it down to around 58%. Let's merge this layer back down. Now let's switch over to the blending tool now with the water pen again. Let's do like 9% brush size with full opacity. And we're just going to go up and down, back and forth, blending out this new color into the tree. Just creating a nice soft gradient for it. And we're going to repeat this blending on the tree branch and then down the tree trunk. And let's work our way down. Still just going up and down, smoothing that edge out. Being careful not to completely run it too far into our background there. Leaving the edge of the bigger tree a little bit more distinctive than the ones in the background. Okay, let's switch over to the blending tool now with the palette knife brush. Let's go to about 10% brush size, full opacity. Now along the bottoms of each of the tree, we're just going to kind of go up and down, blending this texture together. We're going to repeat that across all of our trees. Just like that. So in this section, I wanted to share one of my favorite ways to add texture to an object in a painting like this, while still preserving the shape of the object you're adding texture to underneath. And that's by using a ghost layer over the top of it. And by ghost layer, I mean we're going to have two copies of the same layer next to each other. And the layer that's on top, we're going to actually turn the opacity of it down. So that way you can add texture to that top layer. But since it's turned down, you can still see the solid layer underneath of it. It makes it so much easier to add textures without the risk of ruining your work. Let's create a copy of this layer. And I'm going to come over here to the big tree. And now I'm going to create some texture on the big tree here, just like that. And let's turn this layer's opacity down. Let's turn it down to around 64%. That way we keep the structure of the tree, but we can add some texture to it. And I'm just running back and forth to create some texture along the tree's edge. Working that way up. It kind of creates a nice blend between the darker colors and the lighter colors, which will really help this more solid object kind of marry in with the textures from the background. I'm going to repeat that on the base of the tree trunk. I'm going to work a couple of paint strokes horizontally, dragging some of that color to the side, just back and forth, just like that. And then do a couple of up and down ones. It creates a really nice little texture for our tree. So let's merge these two layers back together so they're one again. And now it's time to paint the bench. So let's turn our trace outline layer back on. Let's add a new layer, and we're going to put that layer on the top. And actually, we're going to turn our trace outline layer up quite a bit. Let's turn it up to like 35%. Now working on that layer on the top again, let's switch over to the water pen now with the paintbrush. Let's do like 7% brush size with full opacity. Let's grab the 6th color in the 5th row. And let's outline the actual bench itself here using the water pen. And let's fill in the entire shape. Let's add a new layer. Now using the 4th color in the 5th row, let's paint some back and forth lines here on top of the bench, kind of curving the bottom of our line upwards a little bit once we reach the middle and for the bottom lines. And let's add a new layer and put that layer into soft light. Let's grab the 2nd color in the 1st row again, the color black. And along the left side edge of that bench, let's draw a little bit of a shadow, just following that edge, just like this. Now let's turn this layer's opacity down. Let's turn it down to around 46%. Now let's turn the trace outline layer off. Let's do a copy canvas and paste. Now on this new copy canvas layer, let's switch over to the blending tool now with the water pen again. Let's do like 5% brush size with full opacity. Now using back and forth paint strokes that I am lifting at the end of each stroke. So I'm going up and then down and then lifting, up, down, lift, up, down, lift. Back and forth and lifting as we're coming back and forth. Just moving our way down the bench. Reaching the end there. Now let's move our trace outline layer back up. Back over the top and turn that back on. Let's add a new layer. Still using the water pen, let's use like 3% brush size with full opacity. Let's grab the 2nd color in the 1st row, the shade of black, and let's outline the edges here, just like this. Filling in the rest of our bench outline with this color. I'm going to see what our bench looks like. Let's turn off the trace outline layer and just make sure it's looking okay. Yeah, it's looking pretty good. Now I'm going to clean up our edges, so let's go to like 2% brush size with full opacity. And let's just clean up our edges here, just cleaning any wonky lines up. Once you get your edges all cleaned up, let's create a copy canvas layer. Make sure your trace outline layer is off. Let's hit paste. Let's make another copy of it so there's two of them again. Switch over to using the blending tool now with the palette knife brush again, about 5% brush size with full opacity. Now using single sideways paint strokes, I'm going to add just a little bit of texture to our bench. Just a little bit here and there, nothing too crazy. Now let's switch over to using the blending tool now with the water pen. Let's use about 4% brush size with full opacity. Now we're going to clean up the edges as well as smooth and add some details to our bench. Along this right side edge here, I'm going to drag right in the middle between the black and the bench part to create kind of a camely brown color, to create a highlight on that. And I'm going to drag this highlight around the corner to create a swirl. We're going to drag this light brown color in the middle and drag it along the edge here, right around the corner, just like that. Let's grab it right there and smooth that edge over. Let's grab it right here between the middle. And an easy way, you can go back and forth and get a middle color. And now we're dragging that middle color down. Let's drag it along that edge. I'm just going to smooth over that bottom edge here just a little bit. Smoothing that edge over just a little bit. I'm going to blend the edge of that bench in with the grass. Then on here, right along this edge, I'm going to drag just a little more of that black onto the curve again because I kind of lost it just a little bit. Now along this right side edge, let's smooth that over. Let's drag around here, kind of smooth that edge over. Kind of just finishing that edge off just a little bit better there. Now let's add some more detail highlights. Let's create another copy canvas layer and paste it over the top. Let's put this new copy canvas layer into black and white. Now let's add a new layer. I'm going to put that layer into overlay. Grab the paintbrush now with the palette knife brush again, 5% brush size, full opacity. Let's grab the color white. Now here in the center of the painting, we're going to add a couple of white paint strokes here and there, but be careful not to put it on the trees, just to brighten that up a little bit. Let's continue these dots sporadically around the background here and there. Couple up here, and I'm basically just adding new little highlights periodically throughout the edges. Let's bring a couple over here on the left side, a couple down here, and here I'm just finishing up dots. So once you're happy, we're going to move on to the pathway. We're going to start putting some horizontal paint strokes, working our way wider as we get closer to the bottom. Just working our way outwards here. Now along this edge, I'm going to add a couple of paint strokes. Let's repeat the same on the right. Let's go ahead and put a little bit of highlight here on the far side of the bench. Let's turn this layer down. Let's turn it down to around 48%. Now over this side edge, I'm going to take the lasso tool and we're going to circle that area. Now using Gaussian blur, we can spot blur that area right in there. And let's blur that to around 8%. Let's turn the black and white layer off. And now I'm going to come up here. Let's create another copy canvas layer and paste. Let's switch over to the blending tool now with the palette knife brush. Let's switch over to around 10% brush size with full opacity. And now we're only blending our new highlights. And in this section, I'm being very cautious about blending as well, using a really light hand and trying not to overblend. Trying to avoid blending over top of the trees, I think is going to be your biggest hurdle. Just being careful, we really don't need to blend out the entire painting again, just our new highlights. You might have to kind of turn your canvas a little bit because put a couple in some tight areas. Now for the pathway, we're just going to use our back and forth paint strokes. I'm just going back and forth and then lifting my brush, which will help create some texture but still preserve the shape of our path. And we're just moving outwards and down, working towards the end of our pathway here. All of these new highlights really bring the path to life. And if you go back and forth a couple of times too, you can create some really beautiful color blends with those new highlights. Just like this. Now here, right where the pathway connects, I'm just going to create a couple of paint strokes connecting the two areas, just like that. And then repeating that same texture going down the right side. We're just smoothing out anything that looks a little rough. We're going to come up here up close, just making sure I got all of our additional paint strokes here, because it's really, there's so much going on, it's really easy to miss them. So I am coming up probably a little closer than we should, but so once you get your painting adjusted and smoothed over to how you like it, we're actually going to go back in here real quick and blend out our new highlight on the bench just a little bit more. Here on our bench where we added this new little highlight, I'm just going to add a couple of sideways paint strokes, and they're just one pass paint strokes just to add a little bit of texture to it. Just really focusing on blending all of our colors and textures together. Be super careful too, because it is easy to overdo it. Definitely less is more with this blending. And once you're happy with your bench, we're going to move on to adding some more light and shadow details, and then the final details of our painting. Let's create another copy canvas layer and put the copy into black and white. And for this, you'll just use the hue and saturation tool and just turn the saturation down to 0%. Let's add another new layer and put that into soft light. Let's grab the second color in the first row, the shade of black. Let's grab the soft airbrush. Let's go to like 13% brush size with full opacity. Now right here around the edges, we're going to draw another line that kind of extends from the base up to the top, but not all the way up to the top, and then repeating that same on the right hand side. Now let's use Gaussian blur. Kind of blur that out just a little bit. Let's go to like 10%. Let's turn the opacity of this layer down just a little bit. Let's go down to around 23%. Let's add another new layer and put it into overlay. Let's grab the paintbrush now with the palette knife brush. Let's grab the first color in the first row Now using about 5% brush size with full opacity. Now here in the center of the path, and we're going to start painting short horizontal confetti dots in a line of varying sizes, just like this, until the very bottom of the painting, creating a straight line down. And then we're going to add a couple of confetti dots here in the very center of the painting, creating a nice highlight, just like this. Now let's turn this layer's opacity down just a little bit. Let's turn it to like 86%. Let's turn the black and white layer off. Let's get rid of the black and white layer and merge these two layers back onto the top layer. Let's use our blending tool now with the palette knife brush, and let's just blend out these additional highlights. And then here in the pathway, we're just going to use back and forth singular paint strokes, creating this pretty bright yellow here in the center of the painting. And for this area, definitely be very sparing with your blending. You'll want to kind of keep it looking like a straight line going down of color. And actually, I want just a little bit more right there. So we're going to paint a little right there, and let's blend that out. Now we're going to add one more layer of highlight to brighten and create a nice shine down the center here. Let's add another new layer and keep it in normal mode. Let's use the first color in the first row, the shade of white. Let's switch back to the paintbrush. Now we're going to create another row of paint strokes down the center, again, of varying sizes, just like we did before in the center of that yellow area we just created. Let's turn the opacity of this layer down just a little bit. Let's go to around 62%. And actually, I'm going to move it over just a tiny bit. Let's move it right about there. Now let's create another copy canvas layer and paste it over the top. Let's switch over to the blending tool now with the palette knife brush. Let's go to around 10% brush size, full opacity. And we're going to blend these out using singular or double back and forth paint strokes. Just kind of blending them in, but not completely blending them away, creating a really nice contrast with the yellow. Let's add another new layer. Switch over to the paintbrush again. I'm going to color grab that little shade of green, adding just a couple of these dots here to brighten this area up. Add another 2 or 3 paint strokes right there. And now let's blend them out. Once you get that all blended out, that brings us to part 6, our last section. We're going to be doing a couple of color adjustments and then adding our final layer of highlights and then blending it out. All right, let's add a new layer and put that layer into overlay. I want to adjust the colors just a little bit, so let's open our color palette. Let's grab the 5th color in the 3rd row, that middle shade of blue. Let's switch over to using the paintbrush now with the soft airbrush, about 58% brush size. And starting on the upper left-hand corner, we're going to paint a line from the top to the bottom again, creating a little bit of a vignette. Let's curve this edge here on the bottom left-hand corner, creating kind of a triangle shape. Let's come over here. I'm going to repeat that same on the right-hand side. Now let's use Gaussian blur. Blur it to around 34% or so. Now let's turn this layer down quite a bit. Let's turn it down to around 41%. Let's add a new layer and put that layer into overlay. Let's use the first color in the 2nd row. And let's shrink our brush size down to around 47% with full opacity. Now right along this edge here, we're going to create kind of a U shape, just a slight U shape. And this is to help deepen the edges up a little bit more and bring a little more focus to the focal point of light in the middle of our painting to create some more depth. Just to kind of give it a little bit more contrast. Let's bring a little bit of this red up here too, on that right-hand corner. Now let's use Gaussian blur. And blur that out to around 32%. Now let's turn the opacity of this layer way down. Let's turn it down to around, let's do like 40, let's do 43%. Now let's add our finishing layer of highlights. Let's add another new layer. Let's put this layer into overlay. Let's use the palette knife brush now with about 5% brush size. Let's use first color in the first row. And we're going to add small, short confetti highlights in sporadic areas across the entire painting. Just being careful not to over highlight. It's definitely easy to add more than it is to take them away. This will really help to brighten and create a lot of new colors and tones within our already established colors. The only place I'm not going to have you add highlights to, though, is the pathway. Don't add any new ones there. Let's put a couple down here in the grass area on the left side. Carry that across the middle bottom area and then onto the right side area as well. Then just continuing to add a couple more here and there just to fill in areas that might be a little too dark still. And then filling in the edges here just a little bit more. Once you're happy with the highlights you've added, we're going to adjust the tree. Let's add another new layer and put that into overlay. Let's add another layer of highlight over top the edge of that tree, just like that. Keeping it here just on the right side. Let's turn this layer's opacity down. Let's turn it down to around 48% or so. Now let's blend out our new highlights. Now let's switch over to the blending tool now with the palette knife brush again, 10% brush size, full opacity. And let's take another copy canvas and paste that over the top. For this, we're just going to come in here and go back and forth, up and down, creating a little bit of paint texture along that edge, just like that. And for this, I'm using a really fast back and forth scrubbing motion to really rough up that texture. You may have to pick up your brush a couple of times to get it to really create some nice textures in there. And then using horizontal paint strokes, we're going to come in here and blend that new detailing out, which creates a really nice variety of texture throughout, allowing that texture to really take hold. Now up in here where that kind of happened, I'm just dragging some of that darker color back over top that area and then dragging that back up. And we're going to repeat that on this lineup up here. And just like before, we're going to blend out only our new highlighted areas. Just continuing to blend our way down. Just continuing to blend out over here. Just going in, fixing any like weird little textures here and there. And then finishing up blending these middle dots here. And then when you're happy with your blending, let's create another copy canvas layer and paste it over the top. Now let's go to sharpen. And let's sharpen up our painting. Let's go to around 25% or so, and we're done. Now let's sign our painting. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video and the tutorial. We definitely covered a lot in this one, so I hope you had fun painting. I'd love to know too what your favorite part of the painting was, and if you want to see any more tutorials in this painting style. I had a lot of fun with this, so definitely let me know below. I have a lot of other tutorials now up on my channel, so definitely go check those out. And as always, if you like this video and want to see more content like this, I invite you to like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps the channel out, and I'll see you in the next video, friend. Happy painting!